This is the Reviewing Network Live, a weekly stream of consciousness recording session where I sit back with you folks out there, talk about some of the big news stories from the past week, and some other things I found that might be of amusement to you out there. I think you might get a kick out of it. Now, these are more like audio podcasts and are much longer than my usual videos and are also, for the most part, unedited and will contain some foul language. So, if you're easily offended by that, I advise you to maybe step back a bit, maybe go somewhere else. But hey, if you're up to the challenge, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Thanks. And for the 23rd time ever, we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Reviewing Network Live. This is, of course, the show where we look back on the events of the last week, and you saw that I put the disclaimer before the actual show, so that's going to be a new thing that we're going to be doing from here on out. Just try to experiment with some things here. So, we have a lot of stories to cover. It was a busy news week, and I'm going to try to get as much as I can this week, because next week, of course, is going to be the Super Bowl Live rewatch, and I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. I'm going to talk about that at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. But, with that said, now that I don't have to do the disclaimer anymore, let's go ahead and let's begin the conversation. And as per usual on the show, we begin with the weekend box office, which is interesting, but maybe not for the reasons that I think a lot of people were expecting, because the big movie that was supposed to come out this weekend, and it did open at number one, but considering what it had behind it in terms of its budget and all that, it was not a pretty opening for this movie. We'll eventually get to that one once we get to the number one movie, but let's go ahead and take a look at the other movies in the top five. 3, 4, and 5 really are kind of the same things we've talked about over the last couple of weeks, so we won't really delve into them too much. Just quickly run through them. Number 4, Migration, only dropping 16% from last week to $4.1 million. Still hanging in there. $106.2 million domestically, over $220 million worldwide after 7 weeks. Still hanging in there. Still a fun movie. I still got to see that movie again in theaters. Hopefully it's still going to be there in a couple of weeks. But yeah, Migration, really good movie. One that I definitely recommend checking out if you're looking for a good, fun family movie to check out. Most people will probably recommend number 4, which is Wonka, finally dropping down a spot to 4 with $4.8 million, dropping only 16% as well. Finally crossing the $200 million mark domestically this week, $201.1 million domestically, $571 million worldwide. Massive hit. Another movie that had a low drop-off, the number 3 film, which was number 2 last week, Jason Statham's The Beekeeper. Now, I said last week the number 1 movie was The Beekeeper, but after the estimates came in, after the finals came in, it was basically Mean Girls at number 1 again. It was close, though, real close, but Mean Girls dropped out of the top 5 this week, too, so that should tell you something about what the number 2 and the number 1 movie is like, so... But Beekeeper, $5.3 million, opening dropping to 21%, $49.4 million, crossed over $100 million worldwide last week. It's now at $122.5 million. Fun movie, man. Fun movie. I can't recommend that one enough if you're looking for a dumb, fun movie, dumb, fun action movie. It's definitely that and then some. So let's get to the 2 new releases. And I say 2 new releases because one we kind of already knew about, and then there was another one that had kind of a sleeper audience build, and that's what you kind of expect with the movies, with these movies that this is based off of. So number 2 this week is The Chosen Season 4 episodes 1 through 3. Now this was a Fathom Events special where, of course, you had episodes of this religious show called The Chosen, which if you don't know what that is, I've got it right here. The Chosen is basically the first multi-season series about the life and ministry of Jesus of Nazareth, and it's been they've had these several episodes of the show actually put into theaters through Angel Studios, which is of course the company that put out The Sound of Freedom last summer, and they've had these special theatrical releases. They did like a Christmas one at first, and then slowly but surely they started putting episodes of the show in theaters, and this was actually the first time there's going to be the entirety of the show's 4th season, which will be released in 2-episode blocks. So 1 through 3 is going to be playing for 2 weeks, and then 4 through 6, and then 7 through 8. And the first 3 episodes showing, according to the creator, creates a brief intermission for the 3-hour event. So it's a very interesting situation here to have a TV series on the big screen and to do it in this type of way. Like, it's really something that, it's very interesting. And I don't know if it would be something that somebody would want to do full time, but having your show on the big screen for a couple of episodes is actually very, very interesting to do, and it's worked out in their favor, man. I mean, $6 million for something that did not really have that much of a built-in audience going forward. Everyone is the people that knew about it kind of had to go through, it had like a little sleeper run at it, and it's brought in $7.5 million over the course of its, I believe it's 5-day run, 4-day run, because it opened on Thursday. I thought it opened on Wednesday, because that's usually what happens with movies like this. But no, this opened on Thursday, so $7.4 million on over 4 days for something that didn't really have that big of a promotional hike. Pretty impressive stuff, man. And like I said, I would like to, it wouldn't be surprising if somebody actually tries to do this, like one of the major studios tries to do this one day, like maybe HBO decides to say, you know what, let's test this out. Let's put a couple of episodes of the show that we have, that we're very excited about. We'll put it up on the big screen and see what happens there. I don't know what type of a show or movie would do that, but I feel like that could be something that could be interesting to see if that actually happens. So yeah, The Chosen was number 2 this week. Seasons 4, episodes 1 through 3. So let's go ahead and talk about the number 1 movie of the week, which I think everybody was kind of expecting, but even then, this was not that big. This was much bigger of a story than it probably was expecting to be. Taking a little drink. That's what I said, man. Like, we sit back, we have a drink, and we talk about the things that happened before. And I'm not drinking like any alcohol or anything. I'm literally drinking Gatorade Zero Fruit Punch. Zero sugar, man. But anyway, the number 1 movie this week is, of course, Matthew Vaughn's Argylle. Now, this was a movie that was heavily hyped through, of course, NBC and their Universal Networks and Universal Outlets. Universal Pictures, of course, is the studio behind this. And they, of course, on all the NBC networks. And you saw this a lot during the Sunday Night Football games, the playoffs, and strong cast: Bryce Dallas Howard, John Cena, Samuel L. Jackson, Bryan Cranston, Dua Lipa, Henry Cavill, Catherine O'Hara, Matthew Vaughn, the director of the Kingsman series. I mean, so much for this movie going forward, and man, it crashed and burned at the box office. This is the thing that this movie cost $200 million. This is the 3rd consecutive movie from Apple Studios that cost $200 million, and like, I don't know how that's sustainable for a company like Apple. Yes, I know that Apple is a big company. I'm looking at an article from Deadline Hollywood saying that they're a $2.87 trillion company. And yeah, they're able to shell out these movies for $200 million because we had Napoleon and Kills of the Flower Moon. But with that said, though, like, when is this at some point, when is this going to get to a point when people realize, oh shit, maybe we should stop spending so much money on this? Because a $200 million budgeted movie, this thing brought in $18 million in America. And total for worldwide, $35 million. For a movie that has $200 million in marketing right now, a movie that has a $200 million budget, which, by the way, I saw the movie. This did not look like a film that had a $200 million budget. Where did the money go for this? But if you want to see my full review of that, I got that, and also the movie that you should have seen, the new release that you should have seen that came out this weekend, Orion in the Dark, over on the other channel. So I'll put a link to that in the corner. But let's talk about what's interesting about this whole thing. I have the story here from Deadline Hollywood about what happened here, and this is another article from Anthony D'Alessandro talking about the box office, and let's see. Let's go to, here we go. So, continuing from the article here, it's just like, it says, in the cases of Napoleon and Kills of the Flower Moon, there's a small transactional home entertainment window. Furthermore, if Apple isn't going to get hurt on the 35% Rotten Tomato critically derived Argylle, then Universal will with its distribution deal. How does Apple get away with not being dinged is what I'm often asked by several industry sources when it comes to the tech company playing in the field to the box office. And he goes on to say, on the one hand, there's something to be thankful for on behalf of exhibition that the streamer is embracing wide theatrical. Exhibitors need movie-like air. In the case of Argylle stateside, it's $9 million in the bank when you factor circuits rental. Then again, the overall marketplace is an estimated $63.4 million this weekend for all titles. We certainly don't want Apple to abandon theatrical. However, how long can this reign of $150 to $200 million undergrossing movies continue for the streamer? That's the question. Will Apple ultimately belt-tighten after the string of uber-expensive movies? Who makes an R-rated $200 million movie? Which, if this movie was going to have any kind of success, I think that needed to be an R-rated movie, because the director Matthew Vaughn had success with Kingsman, which was an R-rated movie franchise similar to this, but like, and he basically goes on to say every corporation wants to profit. There are some, and they talk about some of the movies that they've got coming up at Apple, including the Greg Berlanti directed space race rom-com movie, the untitled Project Artemis, starring Channing Tatum and Scarlett Johansson. And Cape Canaveral was rebuilt for the $100 million Apple pickup, which is quite a lucrative spend from what I told is a cute rom-com and a feat up there with installing faux cornfields in Australia on a Superman movie. One rival development executive said about Apple, the difference between a motion picture studio and Apple is that we develop and develop to make features perfect. We don't just willy-nilly hand over creative reins that allow chaos to reign, which, if you've seen a lot of Apple's movies, honestly, most of them are not that great. I mean, every once in a while, you get that one little gem. You get something like a Spirited or even Killers of the Flower Moon. But a lot of those movies do feel like really movies that are almost fake in some ways, or lesser quality movies of movies from 30 years ago. Like, I talked about one of them on the Argyle review about, like, the recent Mark Wahlberg movie, The Family Plan, which basically is just a retread of Undercover Blues, that movie with Kathleen Turner and Dennis Quaid, a movie that wasn't even that great to begin with, but that's just an example of what I'm talking about here. So Keith goes on to say that the defense has been that these movies, Argyle, Kills of the Flower Moon, and Napoleon, are brand plays for the service, trickling to drive global subs to Apple TV+. One film finance source told me that despite the movies being textbook bombs to Apple, their advertising cost. Witness the 10 Oscar nominations and 200 accolades for Martin Scorsese's Kills of the Flower Moon, and the anecdotal claim that the movie is the most popular movie among streaming platforms, despite the fact that it hasn't appeared in the Nielsen streaming ratings yet. Which, yeah, this is very, very complicated stuff, really, to think about, because, Apple is still relatively new at putting movies out like this, and I don't know if they really know the grand circumstances of what they're doing here. So they go on to talk about Napoleon as well, which had a production cost of $165 million and a global gross of $219 million. Film finance sources tell me that the Ridley Scott-directed, 3-time Oscar-nominated movie likely lost around $16 million in its theatrical run off the global market alone, but made up for it in its liminal transactional run. That's just theatrical. However, the massive $165 million loss hangs on Apple. It's a similar scenario on Kills of the Flower Moon, a $20 million global loss on theatrical, which made up for in minimum home entertainment, with the entire news of the $200 million cost hanging around Apple's neck. So it's a tricky situation, like I said before, but what about Universal? What did they get out of this situation? As the article goes on, it says, in regards to Universal's skin on Argyle, I hear it's a distribution deal in the sense that they get around an 8% fee at the box office. Chances are Universal isn't going to collect that. I hear Universal is on the hook for 50% of the $80 million marketing campaign, which, a $200 million movie, and they have an $80 million marketing campaign behind it, too. That's almost $300 million on this movie that's not going to make a profit in any way, shape, or form. Like, what the hell were you thinking? And it says here, and that the studio collects back what it's owned in marketing from the box office before it collects a distribution fee. Why did Universal get involved with Argyle? Universal boss Donald Langley wanted to get into future business with Vaughn. All these Apple distribution deals work differently. In certain cases, some studios get a guaranteed distribution fee, even if the movie buckles at the box office. With Argyle, Matthew Vaughn arguably clocks the lowest cinema score of his career to date. By the way, financially, he's all right. His Marfion financed Argyle and then sold it to Apple for $200 million. The filmmaker self-finances and then sells his movies, which have been practiced going back to the Kingsman movies at 20th Century Fox, that studio acquiring the first two movies at $100 million apiece. So, okay, for Matthew Vaughn, it kind of makes sense, because he has proven that he can sell his movies. Like it says here, he self-finances and then sells his movies. But there is a lot really to take in on this whole situation in general. I mean, really, how much longer is this bubble gonna go until it finally bursts? Like, that moment's finally gonna come when you spend more than $500 million on movies that are not really gonna make a profit back in any way, shape, or form, except on your streaming service, which isn't really one of the top streaming services, even though you have a lot of great stuff on there, like Ted Lasso, and the morning show, the Peanuts specials, all those stuff on there, like at some point that bubble is going to burst, and you can't just keep doing this until that moment happens. Like, you have to figure out what your game plan is in terms of like your the way you handle your movie business. I mean, this is something that's a really tricky thing to do, and Amazon, I think Amazon kind of set the tone pretty well so far, because look at what happened in the last year when they took over MGM. They had a couple big hits with Creed 3 and Air, and then just recently, this past month, we had The Beekeeper. Excuse me. So yeah, they're slow. Like Amazon right now, they're kind of figuring out. They kind of got a way to run the studio that they have now. Apple, I think it's going to be tougher for them to handle if they keep this up. I think someone really needs to come in that knows how to work in the movie business and show them how to do it right, because I really don't know how much longer they can keep doing this without losing some serious money in the long run. I mean, yeah, they make a lot of stuff that we all use, but at the same time, it's only a matter of time before that bubble's going to burst. So whatever happens sooner or later, we will see. But Argyle, not the biggest hit right now, and despite all of that, it could probably still be the #1 movie next weekend, because next weekend does not have a massive caliber hit there. Lisa Frankenstein is a movie that I'm really looking forward to seeing, but I don't know if that's going to be any bit of a profitable hit. Turning Red goes into theatrical release this week too. Something I'm also looking forward to, but Soul did not do so well when it opened up last month in theaters, so I don't know how well that's going to do in theaters, but we will see. It's going to be a very, very slow weekend heading into the big game weekend, Super Bowl weekend. But we'll talk about the Super Bowl in just a moment. But let's go ahead and get into some news stories, because we have a lot of interesting news stories that came out this week. And let's go ahead and take our trip down to Orlando, Florida for the first story. So the biggest news story of the week, I think, is Universal Orlando officially announcing Universal Epic Universe. They had a big video come out on Tuesday talking about the third straightforward theme park for Universal Studios. The Universal has Universal Studios Florida. They have Islands of Adventure. Volcano Bay could technically be considered the third park, but it's mostly a water park, and I don't know how the theme park thing works, if that's considered a technical theme park that's involved in the big three. But if it's not, this is the third of the three theme parks, the chance for Universal to continue to chop into Disney's mark on the Orlando area. So I have the story here from the Hollywood Reporter talking about Universal Epic Universe. On Tuesday, the Florida-based NBC Universal theme park and resort teased talking about all the lands that they have here. The first one they have is Celestial Park, and it's a land that embodies the literal park experience with lush living gardens, shimmering waterways, and stroll-worthy paths alongside astronomical and mythological inspired architecture. It also confirmed that the themes of the Epic Universe's three previously unannounced parks, beyond Super Nintendo World. We have the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, the Ministry of Magic, which will combine the elements of both the Harry Potter and the Fantastic Beasts franchise. How to Train Your Dragons, the Isle of Berk, which is going to be perfectly timed because we've got the live-action movie coming out in 2025. And Dark Universe. Yes, they're making a movie, but they're making a theme park based off the Tom Cruise Mummy movie. Actually, no, that's not the case, but we'll get to that in just a second here, because it is definitely not that, but it's much better than that. So let's see, a gateway to Epic Universe's Four Other Lands. Celestial serves as the first stop for all park guests and will feature in-park accommodations, fountain shows, a wet play area, a carousel, a dual-launching racing coaster, and themed restaurants and shops. So they're bringing back kind of a Dueling Dragons roller coaster that they had at Islands of Adventure, and now it's going to be here. Among the park's other attractions is Starfall Racers, which launches guests into a rocketing race along 5,000 feet of track aboard competing comets reaching up to 62 miles an hour and heights of 133 feet. A dual racing attraction, the coaster also features various maneuvers such as the Celestial Spin, which sees two vehicles performing an inverted crisscross while speeding through the air. The grand centerpiece of Celestial Park is Constellation Carousel, an all-ages attraction that takes guests on a whirl through the Milky Way Park. Park attendees will not only glide forward and backwards in constellations, but make 360-degree rotations, what the park describes as a dance of music and starlight. A center and immersive feature of the park will be the interactive wet play area Astronomica, a collection of crystal blue fountains that spring to life among guests. The attraction doubles as a giant compass, pointing park attendees to the various lands of Epic Universe. Additional fountain shows, some reaching up to 135 feet in the air, and programmed to sway the music and interactive Lightning Day round will be located throughout the land's 7 acres of water. This, I think, is the coolest part here. The park will serve as home to the Universal Helios Grand Hotel, a 500-room resort located at the end of the park with unique views and a dedicated entrance, bringing guests to the place in the world where the heavens and earth I have dyslexia. I don't really have dyslexia. I just can't read this right. The heavens and earth unite. A collection of themed restaurants and shops will be available. This is why I say this is mostly unedited, including the Atlantic, a full service surf and turf restaurant inside a Victorian aquarium with views of the land, and the Blue Dragon Pan-Asian restaurant, another full-size experience accented by neon dragons and ethereal lanterns, and featuring a Chinese, Japanese, and Thai menu. The Oak and Stars Tavern's Savory Barbecue, Pizza Moon's variety of pizza pies, and Moonship's chocolate and celestial sweets unique selections will serve as quicker service options alongside retail locations like the Nintendo Superstar Store. And I think that's really the coolest thing about this, is that the hotel is inside the park. It kind of reminds me of what Disney's California Adventure has with the, I think it's the Grand California Hotel, where you can just walk into the California Adventure Park and you're just right there, right from the hotel room. Like, it's really something that's impressive to look at. I haven't seen it in person, but I've seen videos of people walking from the hotel to the park, and like, you go on this pathway and it's just like you're there. It's just like, it's a cool thing to see, honestly. And so let's see. Portals that capture the distinctive theme and creativity of the remaining 4 lands take guests from Celestial Park to inside the Ministry of Magic, where park attendees will experience the 1920s era of the Wizarding World. The land features a blend of Paris and the Fantastic Beasts series and the British Ministry of Magic from the Harry Potter series. And here they're talking about Super Nintendo World, which we kind of already knew was coming. It will usher guests through the iconic Green Pipe, where they can access attractions and experiences based in the shared universes of Mario, Luigi, Princess Peach, and Donkey Kong. Following a separate DreamWorks land tease last January, which I guess is going to be replacing the Woody Woodpecker Kids Zone, the introduction of the Isle of Berk promises parkgoers can soar with dragons and take part in Viking adventures inspired by the How to Train Your Dragon movie franchise. And finally, the Dark Universe will call upon fans of Universal's classic horror films with encounters featuring the experiments of Dr. Victoria Frankenstein amid a shadowy landscape home to monsters, myth, and mystery. So it's basically the classic movie monsters from Universal. And like, when you look at the map, really, see it's just those 5 areas. It doesn't really sound like it's a whole lot, but if you watch the video for this, it really goes into more depth of what's going to be in each specific part of this place. It sounds really cool, man. It sounds like a really, really fun idea, and like, some of these things I would really like to see in real life. Like, I'd like to see Super Nintendo World. I want to see the Isle of Berk in real life. Like, I feel like this is something that could be really, really fun and cool to check out. Then I can't wait for this thing to open up, and it's a little more than a year away. It's coming in 2025, so that's something that they're really working their tail off to get it going. And from the stuff that I've seen for this, it looks pretty damn cool, and I honestly can't wait to see it. And I think a lot of us can't wait to see it either, because it looks like it's going to be something that's really, really, really cool that they're working on. So I'm definitely looking forward to checking this out. Universal's Epic Universe. I'll put a link to the video where you can check out what they talk about below here in the comments. Not in the comments, the description. So be on the lookout for that. But yeah, Universal's Epic Universe sounds pretty awesome. So with that said, let's move on to the next story that we have. So a movie that has been talked about for a while now and is coming over 20 years after the original film is finally getting its long overdue 3rd film in the series. It was announced this week that 28 years later is finally moving forward, with Danny Boyle coming back as director, Alex Garland is returning as the writer, and the original star Cillian Murphy is set to return as an executive producer. This is again from The Hollywood Reporter. Sony bought the movie. 28 years later, the hot package from director Danny Boyle and writer Alex Garland has landed at Sony. The Culver City-based studio has come on top after a protracted bidding war to win the rights to the sequel package to the 2002 horror classic, 28 Days Later. Of course, 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later were released by 20th Century Fox back in the day under Searchlight Pictures, and Fox Atomic, I think it was. It was that sub studio that Fox had for like a very brief period of time that really did not produce a whole lot of memorable movies as far as I remember. But director Danny Boyle and writer Alex Garland have reunited to write and direct the sequel, which also comes with a part 2 to be written by Garland. Boyle would only direct the first project, with the sequel's director to be determined at a later stage. So, I guess this is a 2-part movie to wrap it up. So, I mean, it kind of makes sense considering it's 28 years later, and I figure it's got to be more than one movie that got here, which, I don't know, that could be very interesting to see how that plays out. But Cillian Murphy, whose career was launched thanks to the original movie, is also returning as executive producer. The Oppenheimer star could also possibly act in the project, although details are being quarantined. Let's see. In the end, the bidding came down to Warner Brothers and Sony. The idea of having the original creators returning to lead a sequel or two has some comparing it to George Miller's returning to Mad Max with 2015's Fury Road. The deal details are unavailable. Each movie would have a budget in the $60 million range, but it's unclear how goalposts or compensations may have changed during the high-stakes negotiations. A theatrical release was of great importance to the filmmakers. Sony has a unique weapon in the auction, a 30-year-plus relationship between studio head Tom Rothman and Danny Boyle. Of course, Tom Rothman founded Fox Searchlight in the 1990s, ran Fox's film division in the early 2000s, worked with Boyle on 8 movies ranging from A Life Less Ordinary and The Beach, which was Boyle's first collaboration with Garland, to the Oscar-winning Slumdog Millionaire and 127 Hours. More than 20 years later, Boyle and Garland collaborated on 28 Days Later, the film that reinvigorated the zombie genre, paving the way for such titles as The Walking Dead, World War Z, Zombieland, and The Last of Us, to name a few. So, yeah, a movie that has been talked about for a long period of time. There was even a movie that was supposed to be before that called 28 Months Later, but enough time had passed so that the idea could become 28 years later. And 28 Days Later is one of those very unique zombie movies that really still holds up to this very day. The marketing campaign for that movie, the trailers for that, still hold up after all these years. And of course, they made a sequel 28 weeks later, which was not a good sequel. It was definitely a step down. It felt like a lot of retreading overall compared to the first movie, mostly because you didn't have the same people working on that movie on 28 Days Later working on that movie. So having these guys together for this new film, it definitely gives me a lot of hope of what this could really be like. Danny Boyle is a guy that can take any genre, really, and make something very unique and very fun out of it. I mean, he's made a lot of great movies over the course of his career. Alex Garland has made a lot of good movies as of late, Ex Machina, Annihilation. And Cillian Murphy's on a roll right now with Oppenheimer right now, possibly going to get him his Academy Award. But yeah, this is something that's got me really excited to see how this plays out. So I'm definitely looking forward to checking this out indeed. I think a lot of us are really looking forward to seeing what will happen with these characters from the original 28 Days Later and how the storyline will eventually come to an end with this 2-part film that they're doing. So I'm definitely very excited to see where this plays out. So definitely looking forward to 28 Years Later for sure. So let's go ahead and move on to story number 3. So how fitting that on the first day of February 2024, February 1st, we got 2 stories revolving around Tim Burton. The first story came out that the Beetlejuice sequel, the one that we thought was never going to happen, got its official title in a poster. It's called Beetlejuice 2024 AD. I think I don't know if it's just called Beetlejuice or just that title I just said, because when you look at the poster, it literally says Beetlejuice 2024 AD. So I don't know if that's the full title or not, but I mean, it's better than calling it Beetlejuice 2. Just say the name again. I mean, that's part of the thing with Beetlejuice, and which probably tells me we're getting a trailer right before the Super Bowl or during the Super Bowl. It might be one of those little surprise trailers that you don't usually see coming until you're watching the game itself. So that will be very interesting to see when we eventually get that clip. I'm actually very curious. I mean, I have my doubts about it because I've talked about my thing with comedy sequels in general. Like, comedy sequels, usually if you wait more than, what are we at now with Beetlejuice? Like over 35 years now until we get this new movie. 9 times out of 10, it's probably not going to be good, but I hope it's good. I hope this trailer does at least give me some promise or something that really gets me excited about it. But I'm gonna be going in with precautions. I'm going in there with the belief that it's probably not going to be as good as the original, but we'll see what happens there. But we're not here to talk about Beetlejuice. We're talking about the other story that broke on the exact same day the story broke on the title for Beetlejuice 2, and that is that Tim Burton has another project coming up with Warner Brothers, and that is a remake of Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. This is from Deadline Hollywood, and I like the way this starts. It says, like, in the wake of Barbie racking up 8 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, and becoming Warner Brothers' highest-grossing movie of all time at $1.44 billion, here's another female power event project that's in the works under the Michael DeLuca and Pamela Abdy administration. Another female power event project, and it's directed by an over 50-year-old man, probably, maybe in his 60s too. How old is Tim Burton? Now I'm curious. 1958. So, yeah, he's in his 60s, mid 60s actually, 66 years old. When, if my math is correct there, but I find that kind of funny that they started off that way. But the story goes on to say, we understand that Tim Burton is attached to direct Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, a reimagined telling of the 1958 Warner Brothers movie classic, which Gone Girl scribe and Sharp Objects Emmy nominee Gillian Flynn is writing. Gillian Flynn, I think, is the same writer that also wrote Gone Girl, too, if I'm not mistaken. The original sci-fi cult classic made a reported $88,000, starring Allison Hayes as a wealthy heiress whose close encounter with an alien triggers her to grow into a giant, complicating her marriage, which is already in turmoil, no thanks to her philandering husband. Burton has delivered reimagined 50s sci-fi movies before for a mass audience, that being 1996's Mars Attacks, which is actually based off the Topps trading card and features an ensemble cast of Jack Nicholson, Annette Bening, Natalie Portman, Danny DeVito, Michael J. Fox. That movie goes to $101 million domestically at the global box office. And, so, yeah, Attack of the 50-Foot Woman is getting a remake, and one that I think that's been kind of long overdue. I mean, that's one of those movies that I'm actually really surprised it took them that long to actually remake, honestly. But, of course, when you hear Tim Burton, you're probably already starting to think of the Tim Burton regulars that are going to be probably the 50-Foot Woman. I already saw people saying, Helena Bonham Carter, or Eva Green, or I even heard someone say Jenna Ortega, which I don't know. I think she's too young for that role. If they want to go step aside from casting a Tim Burton regular, I have a good choice for them. And this is somebody that I thought, if I was going to remake Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, who would I get to play this role? And for some reason, what came into my head was Brie Larson, of course, Captain Marvel. I think Brie Larson is probably perfect for that role. I mean, I think she could really fit that role well. I think she could probably play well with the sci-fi concept here, being this 50-foot woman. Like, I don't know why. She was always a person I saw, and I was just like, that's the person I would cast if I was doing a remake of this movie. And, some people out there right now are going like, well, Brie Larson's not a great actress. She's got an Academy Award for a reason. She won it for a movie that she was actually really good in Room, and she's proven time and time again she's a great actress. No matter how you feel about the Captain Marvel movies, she's still a really good actress. And I mean, she's shown it. She's more than proven it. And me personally, I think that's probably the perfect casting I would go with if I was casting this movie, but I'm not, so I don't know for certain who they're going to get with this. This will actually be the second time in the last 30 years they've actually remade this, because Christopher Guest did one in the 1990s, which was a Fox movie, I think, with Daryl Hannah in the leading role, which was a really... I don't remember too much about it, but it's one that I did remember seeing a couple times when it was on TV. It used to play on the Sci-Fi Channel a lot back in the day. But that's just my personal casting. I would go with Brie Larson if I was running this project, and I would pick her to be the person to star in the title role. But, it's probably going to be somebody like Helena Bonham Carter or Ava Green, or maybe even Jenna Ortega, or even Catherine Zeta-Jones. I could probably see Catherine Zeta-Jones probably fit in that role, since she's on Wednesday with Jenna Ortega, which Tim Burton also produces. But feels like this one could possibly work if Warner Brothers lets Tim Burton do what Tim Burton does best, is to go back to what he does with what he did back in the old days, which I don't know if that's going to play with Beetlejuice 2 coming up, or Beetlejuice, but we will see. But that was one of the other stories that broke this week, so let's go ahead and check out story number 4. So another news story that came out in the last couple of days. This one was kind of expected, even though Jim Carrey was supposedly done with movies after Sonic the Hedgehog 2, which I kind of spoiled the story for you. But Jim Carrey is coming back as Dr. Robotnik for Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Variety has the story here, and it says that Jim Carrey will reprise his role as the mad scientist with the formidable facial hair in Sonic the Hedgehog 3. The news comes despite the fact that, and they say, and here there be spoilers, the second film in the series ended with Dr. Robotnik falling from a giant robot to the ground below, a potentially fatal tumble. In the film's post-credits scene, however, it is revealed that Dr. Robotnik's body had not been found, setting the stage for Sonic's main antagonist to make a dramatic return. The combined global box office for Sonic the Hedgehog and Sonic the Hedgehog 2 stands at $870 million, hence the enthusiasm of Paramount, the studio behind the video game adaptations, for another installment in the franchise. The studio is also making a spin-off series, Knuckles, that will premiere on Paramount+. Carrey's return was teased on social media, with the Sonic filmmakers releasing a teaser that includes Dr. Robotnik's distinctive cackle. Jeff Fowler, who oversaw the first two movies, is returning as director for the latest sequel, and it's coming out in theaters on December 20th, 2024. Now, of course, Jim Carrey has said that he was retiring, and there was a possibility he may not come back for these movies, but I feel like this was kind of a play all along. I think the plan was for him to come back for another one of these movies, because you could tell that he's having the time of his life playing Dr. Robotnik. I mean, it's the one thing I'm really curious about, is that are we finally going to get to see him as the big fat guy that we know Dr. Robotnik to be? Because Jim Carrey, it seems like every movie he's progressing into that character. Like, he starts off kind of like the tip. It's like he starts off like it's looking like Jim Carrey in the first movie, and in the second film, he's completely bald and he's got the big mustache. He's got like the stuff you expect to see from Robotnik. So I'm really interested to see if we're going to see him as the Dr. Robotnik that we see in the video games and the cartoons, where he's a big fat guy. But either way, Jim Carrey usually is a ton of fun in these movies. You could tell, like I said, he's having the time of his life. Plus, the Sonic the Hedgehog movies are a lot of fun. They are the few video game adaptations that really are very fun all around. They kind of fall into like fish out of water territory, but you can tell that these movies are evolving. The second film definitely felt like a film that was clearly made by people who were fans of the franchise. I mean, Idris Elba's Knuckles, I think, was a perfect casting decision there. Getting the original voice of Tails, Colleen O'Shaughnessy, to come in for the second film, I think was pretty cool as well. So it's going to be very cool to see them coming back for this one. I want to see if they know if there's there's been some new casting that is in there. We're going to see Shadow the Hedgehog. As of right now, we don't know who the voice is going to be yet. Some people may be saying Jared Leto, but there hasn't been anything made official just yet. But there's a good cast involved in this one. You've got Yorma Taccone, you've got Krista Fernandez from Ted Lasso, James Woke, a very good character actor, Kristen Ritter from Breaking Bad. Really great actress, very underrated actress. And, of course, you got the same people from the last movie, James Marsden, Tika Sumpter, Lima Jobe, Tom Butler, and, of course, Jim Carrey. I'm definitely looking forward to this one. I love the first two movies. A lot of the same people are back for this one. So, yeah, I'm really, really excited to see where they go from here. And I really am curious to see who they're going to get to play Shadow, because I think that could lead to something really, that could lead to a lot of really fun stuff in this movie. So, it's coming out for Christmas, so I'm definitely looking forward to checking that one out. So, with that said, let's move on to our next topic of discussion. So, seeing as now we're 1 week away from the Super Bowl, everybody's got football fever. Everybody's got those things where you just want to go and watch some football movies, football TV shows, and maybe you want to watch some football highlights in general. I don't know if most people do that, but the big game is coming up, and you know, this is usually the time of the year when I go back and look at one of my childhood favorites, and I figure since it's celebrating its 20th anniversary this year, why not talk about this movie on this particular show? That movie is, of course, Little Giants, and if you grew up in the early 1990s, this was one of those movies where most people probably never heard of it, but if you saw it on a Friday night at a Blockbuster Video or your local video store, you just had to rent it. I mean, it was just one of those movies that just like, something about it just made you want to check it out. Rick Moranis, Ed O'Neill star in it, and you basically have the story here. They're brothers in a small Ohio town coaching rival Pee Wee football teams, and basically, it's Ed O'Neill's team is basically the one team in the small Ohio town, the Pee Wee football teams, but of course there's the rejects, the players that don't get the chance to be on the team, so. Rick Moranis decides, hey, you know what, I'm going to upstage my brother, and I'm going to put together my own football team with blackjack and hookers, and you know what, forget the football and the hook, blackjack, and obvious Futurama joke there, but that is the story here. It's a battle between these two football teams. Whichever one wins this big football game is going to be the big football team for the town, and the funny thing about this movie is that it's actually, as it turns out, like another Warner Brothers movie from the 90s for families, Space Jam. This was actually based off of a Super Bowl commercial from 1992. Of course, Space Jam was based off the one featuring Michael Jordan and Bugs Bunny for Nike, and we'll talk about that later on in this episode. But this one in particular is one for McDonald's, and I've actually got that right here, so let's go ahead and take a quick listen to this.
gentlemen, isn't everything. It's the only thing.
Look, a grasshopper.
High formation, 34 sweep, front two. Got it? Just give the ball to Matt. Tell him to run towards Dad. Got it?
On fields where dads weren't only coaches, and oak trees marked the end zones. And a good day wasn't determined by if you won or lost, but where you went after the game. So McDonald's would like to salute the players, the coaches, and the fan base who helped make this season the perfect season.
We go to McDonald's now, Coach?
After the game, Lenny. This is only halftime. Go sit down.
And I believe that's Richard Dreyfuss doing the narration for this. But what I think is very interesting about this is watching this commercial again. If you've seen Little Giants, you can definitely tell the inspiration is definitely in this. I mean, the opening with the coach basically talking to the players is very reminiscent of what Ed O'Neill was doing in the beginning of Little Giants. You see people holding the big camcorders we all used to have back in the 90s, and you see there's a scene where where they're testing kicking field goals, and you have two adults acting as the goalposts, just like what happens in the movie Little Giants. And it's very funny because, according to an article by the Baltimore Sun, after seeing the commercial, Steven Spielberg contacted them and said, I want to make a commercial into this movie. I want this to be my Home Alone, which explains why Amblin Entertainment is one of the main producers on this. And what really struck me right out of the gate about Little Giants is that we can all relate to kids in this situation. Every one of us has been that kid who feels like we were told that we were never good enough to be in a football team, or having been picked last while picking teams for pretty much any sport in general, or not even picked at all. I think a lot of people can really relate to this particular movie and what the kids go through in this film. And as far as the story goes, it's pretty much a predictable underdog storyline. I mean, it's something that we've seen done over and over again. I mean, you can easily predict everything that's going to happen, especially if you've seen the Mighty Ducks movies, which is pretty much this in general. But my personal opinion, I kind of like this more than the Mighty Ducks. But you pretty much get a lot of the same elements here or there. It's incredibly predictable, but here I think it actually does kind of work. You really do like the camaraderie between the kids in the movie. I think these are very good kid actors that they have in here. You have Shayna Walden, who plays Icebox in this, the only female on any of the football teams, and she really does command the screen on here. You can tell that she really does love playing football and wants to be on a football team, and she shows it in this movie. Like she carries a lot of the charisma in this movie, and you also have Devon Sawa in one of his early film roles. Of course, he went on to have a big career in the late 90s and stuff like Casper. He was also in Wild America. These kid actors in general do a very good job of handling this situation and actually working well against these really good comedic actors, and Rick Moranis and Ed O'Neill. You also have Brian Haley, who was in a number of different movies, including Baby's Day Out. Who else was in here? You also get people like Susanna Thompson, Mary Ellen Trainor, Alexa Vega in one of her early film roles. Harry Shearer's doing the announcing in this. But of course you have the NFL cameos. You've got John Madden here, Steve Entman, Bruce Smith, Emmett Smith, Tim Brown. It's just a perfect time capsule of early 90s. This is what we saw as entertainment back then as kids growing up in the early 90s. And this is one that I used to, like I said, I used to rent this from the video store a lot. We eventually got it to watch all the time. It's just a really fun movie. For even Rick Moranis and Ed O'Neill, they're both very fun to watch in the movie. Ed O'Neill, it's very interesting with him. He's always been a great actor. He doesn't usually pick the best movies in general. Like especially after post Married with Children, it felt like he was just taking movies because, he was on Married with Children, and people thought they would go see him in these movies that weren't really the biggest hits in general. Stuff like Disorganized Crime was one of those examples, The Adventures of Ford Fairlane. But he did star in some real fun movies that were actually kind of underrated. Like I talk about stuff like Dutch, which was a criminally underrated film by John Hughes. The Wayne's World movies, where he's really funny in this great supporting role. The Bone Collector, he was very good in that. He was Popeye Doyle in a TV movie before Married with Children came out, which was supposed to be a spinoff of The French Connection. he's a very damn good actor. Like he really is he's very funny. He can also be very dramatic too. Like he's really a terrific actor, and he was a former football player too. Like he was an undrafted free agent for the Steelers back in the 1960s, and he was there under head coach Chuck Noll in his first year, but he was eventually cut in training camp, basically competing with guys like, Mean Joe Green and L.C. Greenwood, and those two guys eventually went on to become part of the Steel Curtain. And of course, one of the big things about Al Bundy on Married with Children is that he was a former high school football star who had failed to make it big, and had to be reminded about his glory days at Polk High, where he only scored 4 touchdowns in a single game. That was always the big thing with him. But Ed O'Neill is always a great actor. Anytime he's in anything, I'm usually there, even if it's something that's not really that great in general, but he's a great actor, man. I mean, I don't think I need to say too much more about what makes him so special as an actor, but like, he's not only very funny, he can be a really damn good actor when he needs to be. But he works very well against Rick Moranis. You can buy into the fact that these two are brothers, even though one guy is clearly much more. These two are very different in terms of the way they run their teams and run their in general. But it's very well done. It's a very fun movie, all in all, and like, the game itself is always a ton of fun to watch. Like I said, this is my Mighty Ducks. This is the one that I like more than the Mighty Ducks because, it's one of those great things about a good underdog storyline where the team looks terrible in the first half, and then all of a sudden they get that spark again, and everyone starts to work together, and the team starts getting good, and all these crazy situations happens in the second half of this game, and like, all of that happens in this particular movie. In the second half of this game, there's a part of the movie where Becky, like, she decides to go against her father, Rick Moranis' character, by becoming a cheerleader and basically leaving football to the boys in here, and then basically watching the other Ed O'Neill's team completely attacking these players and all that. Becky just decides, screw this, I'm dropping the pom-poms, I'm going back in this game, and immediately she makes an impact on this team, and basically the Giants start making these touchdowns, but also overcoming these personal demons that they have. Like, there's one character who has a fear of dropping passes. He makes a big reception. There's one where this kid who never gets to see his father actually shows up back from a business trip to watch him play football, and you see him running up into the stadium, suit and all, with a suitcase, and he sees him, and he's running around, and he scores a touchdown and all that. Like, only in a movie like this could that make sense whatsoever. And like, it's ridiculous. It's way too been there, done that. But it's just like, you really do feel for these kids when moments like that happen, and like, and there's a moment at the end of the game where they score a touchdown to tie the game up, and they figure, what, let's go ahead and win it on the last play of the game, and they do the big thing with the annexation of Puerto Rico, inspired by the famous Fumblerooski play, and like, Ed O'Neill's character shouts it out when he actually sees it, just like, Fumblerooski, and the camera's just moving closely in on his face. Like, those are the type of moments that you remember, and of course they win the game on that front, and like, it's just like, moments like that really hold up if you grew up with this movie like I did. I mean, this is a film that, this is a movie I've talked about before in other episodes, in other videos on the other channel, but it's a movie that I always like going back to around the time we get to the Super Bowl. I mean, this is a movie that's just really, it knows exactly what it is. It's not a movie that's really it's a movie that's really, like, it knows exactly what it's trying to do, but it still has that lasting legacy that if you grew up with the film in general, you really do remember it all the way through. And yeah, maybe it didn't quite live up to Steven Spielberg's hope that it would be as Home Alone, but it's still a fun movie overall. I still think it's a very good film, and like I said, it's a movie that I still hold a lot of good memories of. This is the movie that I watch more than the Mighty Ducks, and I like some of the Mighty Ducks movies, especially D2, but Little Giants is the one for me. Like, that's the one I always go back to. So, I've talked about on the show before how I'm a sucker for classic game shows in general, like Jeopardy, Wheel of Fortune, The Price is Right, you name it. Of course, I've been getting a lot into Wheel of Fortune, watching some classic episodes again over the last couple of days, and really, I like going back and watching the old school Wheel of Fortune, like Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, Price is Right, Family Feud, all those shows where it's very different compared to what the shows are like nowadays. Like Jeopardy, Wheel of Fortune, Price is Right, Family Feud, they're all still on the air today, but there are very noticeable differences compared to the shows that we watch now compared to what the shows are like back then. I'm not talking about like set decoration or like the different hosts and all that, but you could tell watching these classic game shows that they were more kind of nuanced. They were more kind of like of the spur of the moment type of situations. They didn't feel like they were instantly being chopped down and edited to perfection like they are nowadays. Like on Wheel of Fortune, like they don't usually show, whenever Pat Sajak hits a bankrupt or a loser turn in the final spin when we get to the final spin of the game, like they usually cut that out. They usually just go to whatever number he spins it on. And you could always tell that they were trying to aim for the highest number on there, like if it's like a $5,000 or $2,000. Like you can always tell the wheel is always set to spin in that area or on that area in general. And sadly, they don't do that type of stuff anymore. They don't usually keep that in the show anymore. Like Jeopardy does that a lot, where they usually cut out whenever they have to go to the judges about a specific answer or so. Family Feud the same way. Price is Right, kind of similar to, like, Price is Right. Like, definitely you could tell that it's game shows back in the olden days were, like, they were more freeform. They were able to do more in the span of what they were able to accomplish. But we're not here to talk about that in particular. There was a game show that was on in the 1980s. It wasn't on for very long, but it shows a lot on It was showing a lot on Game Show Network when the Game Show Network was on the air, and I was getting back into watching it again. As I was watching a couple episodes while I was at work on my breaks, and it's this game show called Hot Potato. And if you don't know the show, it's basically you have two teams of 3 players competing, one of which consists of the previous game's champions. The members of each team have to share a common trait, like a hobby or an occupation. Like you'll have, police officers on one side or firefighters on one side. There'll be like waitresses, singing telegram people, mailmen, that type of thing. And all the questions during the main games had at least 7 correct answers, and you had to get 7 correct answers in order to win these rounds. You had to win 2 out of 3 rounds to win the game. And the questions basically were, they were questions set with a set number of factual answers. For example, like, the 7 wonders, like the 7 wonders of the ancient world, or the ones that I saw, who are the most desirable men and women, judging by the survey. And it's very similar to something like, Family Feud in a way. Like Family Feud, takes these surveys from various places, various people in general. We get shows like that nowadays too, like America Says on Game Show Network does that as well. And in each round, the host, Bill Cullen, who has done a lot of game shows in his career, asked the question and stated the number of acceptable answers. And one member of the team has to basically have initial control, started by each giving an answer or challenging an opponent to do so. If the player gives a correct answer, control passes over to the next team, and if an incorrect answer will send them to this bench behind the podium, and it will knock them out of the round. So the object is to basically either answer all 7 questions or to eliminate your competitor in order to move on to in order to win the round. And if you win 2 out of 3 rounds, you go to the bonus round, where you can win a jackpot, sometimes worth up to $5,000 and then some. And in that game, you have the winning team would basically get comparisons, stuff like, which head weighs more, who's been married more times, like, stuff like that. What's the most populous city, things like that. They give you 2 choices, and you can basically answer the question for $500, or if you get it wrong, you just completely lose it all in general, and you basically end with nothing that you gain from that. You can get a pass on 1 question each time, and the more I was watching the show, the more I started to realize, like, we get all these reboots and revivals all the time of these different shows in general. Why is nobody trying to reboot this show, Hot Potato? Because there was a show that, granted, it didn't last very long in its initial run, because mostly because it was getting beaten out by reruns of Family Feud over on ABC, because they started on NBC in the 12 noon hour before everybody kind of switched over to the noon news. Like in daytime, they had a number of various different shows. It wasn't just, soap operas, game shows, talk shows. Like, it was a variety of whatever you could put on there. And yeah, it didn't last very long when it premiered on NBC, but it had a successful run on other on other networks. Like it was actually on of all places the Christian Broadcasting Network, the Pat Robertson network that of course produces the 700 Club, but also was on USA Network when they aired game shows back in the early 90s. They also had Scrabble and Pressure Luck on there, and then eventually onto Game Show Network. And Game Show Network can also reboot shows that were not successful in modern day. Like they just did it recently with Split Second, which was a show that Monty Hall did back in the 1980s after Let's Make a Deal. They just rebooted that recently with John Michael Higgins, who did America Says. And all I'm thinking to myself is, why doesn't somebody try to do Hot Potato again? Like, Hot Potato, I feel like, is a show that could easily work in modern day, because when you watch these questions, you really do start to when you hear Bill Cullen give these contestants these questions, you really do start to think to yourself, what could that be like nowadays? Like, how could these questions work out nowadays? And it also gets you to thinking of what life was like back in 1984. Like, what was like what specific things in particular would match these things. Like, what's the most common name in 1984, or who's the most desirable man and woman in 1984? Who's the most trusted man and woman in 1984? And it'd be interesting to see them do that in modern day setting. Like, I really want to see somebody take this concept and actually bring it into a modern generation, because I feel like there could be a lot of potential done with this idea, and really what could be done with it if they actually went ahead and actually did it in a modern setting. And I think Game Show Network is the one that has the current rights to it, so I don't know, maybe one day they'll actually do it, but I would really like to see them try to do Hot Potato in 2024. Like, I feel like that could be something that could easily work in a modern setting with with the way the world is and what the questions are. It could make for a lot of very interesting conversations and different things that could easily make this kind of an entertaining show. I'd actually would really like to see someone try to take this out there. So if anybody from Game Show Network is listening, or whoever has the rights to Hot Potato, really start thinking about doing a revival of this show for a new generation, because I feel like there is a possible demand for this show that in 2024. I just feel like there could be possibly that. So I don't know, just kind of a wishful thinking thing on my part. But so with that said, let's go ahead and move on to our next subject. So like I've been saying before, we're getting close to the Super Bowl, and what's more significant now than the game has always been the commercials. We've had over 50 years of Super Bowl commercials, and why not talk about the best ones? My favorite ones overall. I've done a list of this over on the main website, but I've never done it in video form, so let's do this real quickly. Why not? Let's go ahead and take a look at my top 10 favorite Super Bowl commercials of all time, and there's going to be a lot of classic ones here, because a lot of the newer commercials are fine. Every once in a while you get a really good one, like the Paramount Plus ones have been really good. I've not seen a majority of the new commercials for week coming on next week, but except for the new one they just did for Paramount Plus, where it's Patrick Stewart throwing Arnold like a football to try to get to the top of the mountain. It's actually, I love those commercials, those Paramount Plus commercials. Paramount knows exactly what to do with their intellectual properties when it comes to that, But this is going to be a list of my top 10 favorite Super Bowl commercials of all time. The ones I always go back to, the ones I always remember fondly. And let's start off with number 10 on my list. This is from 1992, and it's a Pepsi ad featuring then one of the most successful models of all time. And she still is one of the most successful models of all time. But I think you know what I'm talking about here. But let me play a clip for you real quick.
Introducing a whole new way to look at Pepsi and Diet Pepsi.
I mean, that's a commercial where you have these two kids, they're playing around, and then all of a sudden you have Cindy Crawford, who at the time was one of the most popular models of all time. She's walking over to the Pepsi machine, grabbing a Pepsi with a new can design, and you think the kids are looking at her, but then the kid goes, "Is that a great new Pepsi can or what?" And of course, it's promoting their new logo there. And I mean, taking one of the most beautiful models in the world, Cindy Crawford, and putting her in a commercial for Pepsi at the time of their latest James. That's a clever and brilliant idea. It works because it's one of those commercials that tricks you into thinking it's about something, but then it switches over to something else and does it very well. And it certainly did leave a lasting impact on not just the audience, but with Crawford's relationship with Pepsi, because she'd be in a number of different commercials throughout the course of the 90s. And even there was a sequel ad 10 years later where it was a new Diet Pepsi can, and it was a new batch of kids, and now she has her own set of kids as well. And I gotta tell you, man, Cindy Crawford still looks beautiful to this very day. Like, she looked great 10 years after that commercial aired. And even nowadays, it's just like, I don't know what she's doing. I don't know what she uses, but I want some of that, man. I want to look like that when I'm older like that. But, like, it's crazy. Like, she still looks incredible even after all these years. I don't know if it's plastic surgery or not, but who knows? Maybe that could be natural. But if it is, more power to her, man. But, yeah, that one's one of my favorite ones. So that's number 10. Number 9 is also from 1992. It's one I talked about earlier in the show. And that is the Nike commercial Hair Jordan.
What's all the racket? What's up? I was only kidding. Gruesome, ain't it? Of course you know this means war. Air Jordan and Air Jordan.
What'd you expect? Got my foot?
Nice shot.
Nice shot.
Of course, this is the pairing of Bugs Bunny and Michael Jordan that would eventually lead to Space Jam 4 years later. And it even is referenced in this particular commercial 4 years before the movie even came out. So let me go ahead and play that for you.
This could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
And they weren't kidding, because, you know, Michael Jordan and the Looney Tunes would pretty much be in a number of different commercials, not just for the Super Bowl, but also for, you know, various things like, you know, 10-10-220 or McDonald's and all that. But it was the beginning of a beautiful friendship between the NBA champ and the legendary Looney Tunes characters. And, you know, what makes it work is that it's the overall feel of a classic Looney Tunes cartoon modernized for the audience of the 1990s in a 60-second commercial. I mean, they do a great job of paying homage to the classic cartoons, making the pairing of Bugs Bunny and Michael Jordan feel naturalistic, that it could actually exist. You could believe that these two would have a friendship in real life. And there was a great sequel that came afterwards where it was basically both of them going up against aliens, which that one would later lead to the creation of Space Jam. I mean, that was a good time for both of them. I mean, Michael Jordan, of course, was one of the greatest basketball player of all time at that point. I still think he is. I mean, I like LeBron James, but I'm sorry. Many of those people weren't there when Michael Jordan was at the top of his game in the 1990s. I mean, what he did for the NBA was just incredible. And Looney Tunes was all over the place. This was just a perfect marriage for the kids that grew up around that time period, myself included, and just the pairing of those two together, like. It's just great times, man. They did a great job of blending the animation and the live action. They were a lot of fun to watch, and it's a great commercial featuring two of the most iconic characters in pop culture. Speaking of iconic characters meeting up in this, let's go to number 8, which is one that probably should get more appreciation than it actually gets. It's this Coca-Cola commercial that aired in 2008, and it involves a pair of balloons, which I assume is on Thanksgiving Day, but it's a Stewie versus Underdog, and I'm going to show you a little bit of a clip of that right now. And it is, by the way, during the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. It even says here in the description. So the majority of the commercial is basically this Snoopy and Underdog balloon going after this balloon Coca-Cola, and you know, it's one of those commercials where it doesn't really, like I said, it doesn't really get the appreciation that it deserves. You have them going all throughout New York City, beating each other up, and the only way balloons can do it is just basically you know, push into each other one by one, and it leads to a climax where you know, a secret character comes into play here, and the way they just put this together is great. I'm gonna let you listen to it here. And it's, of course, Charlie Brown, because you know what? Charlie Brown gets the Coke, not only making Stewie and Underdog not very happy, but you know what? Charlie Brown finally gets a win in his life. So you know what? It makes perfect sense. just everything about this commercial is so incredibly done. I mean, the music, it's no dialogue whatsoever. It's done with the music of Wagner's Siegfried. But the other thing that helps the commercial really elevate itself to something incredible is the ending, where Charlie Brown just pops up out of nowhere, takes the Coke, and there's that great little homage to Lucy. Like, you see a kid that looks like Lucy, and she's got the football on her, and it's actually nice to see Charlie Brown catch a break and win something for once. And, you know, it's one of those things that was added in later on, too, because Coke originally hated the ending where the Coke balloon just deflates and the commercial's over there. And I really do feel like that could have easily ruined the ebb and flow of that commercial. I mean, it's a great commercial that doesn't get the proper respect it deserves, and it's a great ad overall. It's great seeing Charlie Brown get a win. And speaking of Charlie Brown, he's involved in the number 7 commercial on my list, which is another commercial that I think has been largely overlooked ever since it came out. But every once in a while, I go back to it and it's just like, how did you guys put this all together? Number 7 on my list is the MetLife Everyone commercial. I mean, how can you not get enthusiastic when you see all these different cartoon characters into one commercial? I mean, not only do you have the Peanuts characters, who were still very much involved with MetLife at the time, even though this was kind of the last couple of years they'd be associated with the MetLife commercials. Although I did hear that they brought them back recently, so maybe this is the beginning of something new again. But not only do you have the Peanuts characters, but you see Scooby-Doo. You see a lot of the characters from Scooby-Doo, many of the Looney Tunes characters, Fat Albert, Mr. Peabody and Sherman, Where's Waldo, the Flintstones, the Jetsons, He-Man, Jabberjaw, many more of these characters. And it's just like, it was at the time the biggest animation all-star cast we had seen since Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I mean, that's something that really is incredible to look at. And I'm guessing mostly because all of them a good majority of them were owned by Warner Brothers at the time, and Classic Media wasn't owned by DreamWorks yet. It's the nostalgic factor that makes this work. You see all these great characters we grew up as kids loving, all in one place. The animation on them is very good. They do a good job of blending the animation and live action very well. I mean, it's a great commercial that really works because of the nostalgic factor, and just seeing all these great characters we grew up loving together in one big commercial like this. It's just like, it's a ton of fun, man. I love that commercial so much. I mean, who doesn't love watching all their favorite childhood characters together in one place? I sure as heck don't. So anyway, on to number 6, and that is the Bud Bowl commercials.
Football fans, get ready for the battle of the century. As unbeaten Budweiser takes on undefeated Bud Light. It's Bud versus Bud Light in Bud Bowl 1. Pick up your official scorecard wherever you see this display.
Bud, super idea. See the neck on that guy?
Use it to follow the action and you could win big. So get ready, get set. On January 22nd, Bud Bowl 1. This time, it's for real.
I mean, talk about a concept that you would think would never work, but it did. The Bud Bowl is, of course, the epic battle between Budweiser and Bud Light, which ended up being surprisingly just as exciting and as entertaining as the Super Bowl itself. I mean, they did a fantastic job of making this so epic. Like, this thing is like every single year from 1989 to 1994, pretty much, they basically made it an event within the game itself. And of course, you had some great stop motion animation in the beginning, and like some great moments all around. I mean, this is one of those things where it's just like, you get so invested in it, and it works because of the stop motion animation, then later the computer animation. The fact that Bud Light treated this so seriously, and they were all very entertaining and fun to watch, and everybody that watched these commercials were just like we got so invested in this. This is something where it just comes out of nowhere. It's just like, why am I so invested in watching two beer bottles going at each other in something that really is not technically not real, but it feels like the real thing? It's just like, I can't really explain why Budweiser never decided to continue on with these, but then again, the last couple of years they did the Bud Bowl, they weren't the same thing. I mean, it was basically just, the last couple of years of commercials weren't really as good as they should have been. They felt like they were afterthoughts, pretty much. Like, they were just there because they felt kind of obligated to do, and they didn't have that ebb and flow that Bud Light really would have done to have these commercials really stand out. I think it was something that was just like the times have changed, and unfortunately, that's a shame with a lot of things. But nowadays, times have changed. But it'd be nice to see them revive this. I mean, it's not like they can't do it. I mean, Bud Light and Budweiser are still owned by the same company, and hey, you can't always win. But what I can say is that the Blood Bowl ads were really a ton of fun to watch. They were so creative. They were so well done. Something that shows that it wasn't easy to accomplish that, but it worked for a good number of years, and it became just as important as the big game itself. So moving on now to number 5, we have Volkswagen's The Force from 2011. I mean, how can you not be? How can you not feel a little bit of heart when that kid looks at the window and sees that is after what he just did with the car, thinking that he made that car turn on. It's just like he has his face like, holy shit, I just did that. Like, so as you can see, we basically have a kid dressed up as Darth Vader, pretending that he's Darth Vader, trying to use the Force on everything, and of course by the end, hoping to use the Force on his dad's car, which he thinks he does before we see that it's his dad that turned the car on, but it's not worth telling him that. And what makes this ad relevant is how relevant it is. Like, a lot of us looked at Star Wars and those other classic films as kids, and we wanted to have that motivation when we played. Like, we wanted to be just like this kid. And much like the Coke ad with Stewie and Underdog, there's no dialogue to it, and the heart of it just comes from that music by John Williams and from the kid itself. And the best part is that ending. I mean, his reaction, like I said, is priceless. Like, you could tell that's a reaction from a real kid that probably thought he was doing that on his own, and it really wasn't. This kid, Max Page, who does a fantastic job, actually recreated this. He even got to meet the real Darth Vader by James Earl Jones. I mean, it's hard not to get a smile out of watching this ad, because that's something that's just really hard to do. It's a great ad with a great kid actor. He sells the role very well, and he does capture the childhood memories that we have of that very well in this commercial. I think it's a very well-made ad. So moving on now to number 4, we have the NFL Network with their ads for Tomorrow, the song from Annie.
What's the matter, Coach? Same little dad. Well, this place is I'd rather be on Super Bowl Sunday, Jerry. The sun come out tomorrow. Bet your bottom dollar that tomorrow there'll be sun.
Just thinking about tomorrow. Says away the cobwebs and the sorrow. Till there's none.
When I'm stuck with a day that's gray and lonely, I just stick out my chin and grin and say, tomorrow, tomorrow, I love ya, tomorrow, only a day.
And of course, in the beginning of the commercial, you have Jerry Jones and Bill Parcells, who was the head coach of the Cowboys at the time. And then you have all these different NFL players. So you see people like Michael Strahan, Ray Rice. And then in the second commercial, you even have somebody like Ben Roethlisberger in there when they did it the next year. It's a very simple concept, taking NFL players and coaches who weren't playing in that year's Super Bowl and just having them sing Tomorrow from Annie. And it just works very well because you can actually tell that they're singing pretty well. I don't know if it's them doing it or it's just something they recorded later on, but like, I never thought I'd see the day where you'd hear Michael Strahan and Ben Roethlisberger singing Tomorrow and actually doing a damn decent job at it. I mean, it's one of those commercials that I don't think gets enough appreciation because they're both really solid ads. I kind of wish they would do more of this in the future, but times have changed. Even for this year with the 20th anniversary of the NFL Network, I'd like to see them kind of redo this again. I don't think they can, but it's a very well done. I mean, it's a very good commercial. The day after the Super Bowl, we're all defeated again, but if it means we can get these players and coaches to continue singing Tomorrow in the near future, I'd be all over that big time. So anyway, let's move on to number 3 on my list, and that is the Budweiser Clydesdale football game from Super Bowl 30 in 1996.
They always do that? Nah, they usually go for 2.
I mean, concept pretty much sells itself. You have these Clydesdales all of a sudden playing football, and they're playing I don't know how they did it, but they play football, and one of them kicks a field goal, and the horses celebrate, and there's 2 guys sitting there just like, I always do that, and the other guy's going like, nah, they usually go for 2. I mean, you just heard it there, but there's actually a little bit of interesting thing here. I guess the person that put this video on YouTube worked on the commercial, and it said, we actually had only 30 days to train the horses to play football. The trainer was Robin Wiltshire, and it played a huge role in shooting the commercial. You were right about the commercial not being computer generated, and yes, lots of squash footballs. It's pretty impressive stuff. I mean, you really can't talk about the best Super Bowl commercials without bringing this one up. It's become synonymous with the Super Bowl itself, with the commercial they've had every year since this ad came out. I mean, everybody has their favorites, but this is just my favorite one. The epicness of it, the idea of horses playing football sounds like the stupidest idea possible, but the way Budweiser does in this ad, they make it as epic and action-packed as it has any right to be. The camera work is well done. The shots are very well done. The fact that they were able to get these horses to actually do this without any CG whatsoever is pretty damn impressive. I mean, it's shot beautifully. It has a lot of great action and epicness to it. It's one of those ads that I always remember when I think of the great Super Bowl commercials. So, moving on now to number 2, we're finally starting to get into the real memorable ones here. And around here in Pittsburgh, you can't talk about Super Bowl commercials, great Super Bowl commercials, without talking about the one and only Mean Joe Green for Coca-Cola.
Mr. Green,
Yeah.
you need any help? I just want you to know, I think you're the best ever.
Yeah, sure.
Want my Coke? It's okay, you can have it. Makes me feel good. Makes me feel nice. Be around. It's the way it should be. I like to see.
Big chill.
Smiling with me. Coca-Cola has life. Have a Coke. Thanks, Mean Joe.
I mean, what more do I need to say about this? It's one of the most popular Super Bowl commercials of all time, and I'd be crazy not to include this on this list. I mean, it's a classic commercial, and it's just a great, heartwarming commercial that you can't help but love. You have to keep in mind of where when this commercial aired, what this was like. It was like, Joe Green was one of the toughest defensive players in the National Football League back then. Back when the NFL was completely different. I mean, this guy people would play with with really bad injuries on their arms and legs, and just like, tape them up. I'm going back and doing this again. Like they both were. This kid and the Mean Joe Green work off each other so well. You can believe their chemistry, and the commercial itself doesn't feel forced or overdone. The reactions just feel natural. If you want to see this, if you were to see this in real life, you could tell that this is something that was really special and really be something like, this would be a moment that you would remember for the rest of your life. It actually happened to you in real life. I mean, this commercial was so popular. They made a TV movie with it, with a young Henry Thomas pre-ET. Now think about that. A 1-minute ad for Coca-Cola gets later expanded as an NBC TV movie, and they thought we were running out of original ideas today. Of course, the commercial had been satirized many, many times. Newhart did a parody, Simpsons, Family Guy, Futurama, and even Coke themselves did a great parody with Troy Polamalu, coincidentally during the last time the Steelers won the Super Bowl. Of course, the original commercial aired when the Steelers won the Super Bowl, the last Super Bowl with Chuck Noll, and then we got this great commercial from 2009 with Troy Polamalu.
We're calling brand manager. Coke Zero stole our taste.
That's great too. It's a commercial for Coke Zero, and they had this campaign back then where you had these two guys that they thought that Coke stole their idea for Coke Zero Sugar, and so Troy Polamalu's running to get the Coke for them, slams down one of the other guys, and the other guy's just like, "Yeah, I'll meet you at the car," and just runs away. And then of course at the end of the commercial, like instead of having Troy Polamalu's jersey thrown at him, he takes the guy's shirt, gives it to him, and this kid's just looking at him, just like, "What the fuck am I gonna do with this shit?" Like. It's a great commercial. I mean, and then, of course, it was inspired by one of the greatest commercials of all time. Whether you've seen it to be satirized or the actual commercial, it's still a classic ad for a number of reasons. I'd be a fool not to include this on the list. So that brings us to the number one best Super Bowl commercial of all time, celebrating its 40th anniversary in 2024. Let's take a look at why 1984 won't be like 1984. Hey, we're watching that.
Apple's computer will introduce Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
That was a bit from Futurama when they did a parody of that commercial, and I threw that in there because that's how the commercial in Futurama ends. It's just like, "Hey, we were watching that." One of the guys is going like that, but like I said, man, this year it's celebrating its 40th anniversary. Great ad from Apple. Not only is it the greatest Super Bowl ad of all time, I would go as far as to say it's the greatest ad of all time, period. I mean, this is directed by Ridley Scott, and this amazing ad cost $1 million, which at the time was unprecedented. And you could just see that Scott put all of his effort into it, and just the visual look of this. This is like a mini movie, and it's very similar to Scott's Blade Runner, with a great story, a great musical score, some good acting, really good visual effects that still hold up for this time period. The fact that this commercial only aired once is impressive, and for a commercial like this, it's amazing that no one's been able to capture the same magic that they did here. Like, I've talked about how the commercials of today, most ones, they pale in comparison to what it was like back around this time. I mean, because of commercials like this, it makes me believe that because with the technology we have today, it cannot be that difficult to make a commercial that's just as epic and as brilliantly handled as this right here. I mean, this is a commercial that it's just one that I always go back to every once in a while. It's just a classic ad. And they tried to do it again the year later with this commercial that was not as successful, but it still has this very unique style to it. It's these people singing "Hi ho, it's off to where we go" as they're falling off of a cliff, and it's directed by, I think, Ridley Scott too. I don't know if it is or not, but it is one of those ads that's just like, it just really is real. It's still very well done, even though it's more grislier than this ad that became this Macintosh ad, but it's still an impressive ad. But 20 years later, they actually did re-release this ad, but basically just put in an iPod on the girl because iPods had become the new thing. And I mean, yeah, they threw an iPod on the girl? I mean, why? I don't know. It's a dumb decision because I think with the 1984 ad, I think it's a timeless ad. I think you could watch it 50 years from now and think, I can tell where this ad takes place, but when you throw in an iPod, I think it loses the timeless value of it. It's not as bad as something like the countless alterations that George Lucas did with Star Wars, or even what Steven Spielberg did with E.T., but hey, unlike George Lucas, Steve Jobs isn't hiding older copies of the ads like Lucas does with the original Star Wars movie, so you gotta give him that. It's a great commercial. It's one of the greatest commercials ever made, if not the greatest commercial ever made. I mean, great visuals, awesome direction by Ridley Scott. Just a classic commercial on so many levels. 1984, the best Super Bowl commercial of all time. So that's everything I have for the Super Bowl and everything for this week. So let's go ahead and wrap the show up by taking a look at some recommendations. Again, it's not a busy week for physical media. I mean, it's not a really good week for newer movies or even older movies. It's pretty slow this week, so hey, it's good for my wallet. Because I spend a lot of money on stuff, so it's good for me that I'm probably not going to spend too much money this week on newer things. But there are some recommendations that I do have. Might as well talk about Orion in the Dark, which I did a full review on over on the main channel. So if you want to go check that out, I'll have a link to it in the comments below, and also with the card at the beginning is when I talked about it before and earlier in the episode. And you really need to be seeing this movie. This is one that I really wish it could have been seen on the big screen. You basically have a story of this kid who has a lot of adolescent anxieties, and one night the Dark shows up, played by Paul Walter Hauser. Orion is played by Jacob Tremblay, and basically he's going to take this kid out on an adventure to help him overcome his fears. And what follows is this amazing visual escapade, and that's well done animation-wise, story-wise. I mean, this is a movie that really should have been put on the big screen in some way, shape, or form, but unfortunately, I guess it's not good enough for the big screen, unlike, Spirit Untamed or The Boss Baby. Why the hell were these movies put on the big screen? Those are the ones that should be put on Netflix, and this should be put on the big screen. I mean, this is a movie that definitely deserves to be seen on the big screen, but you know what? Hey, it's on Netflix. If you're looking for if you're looking for something to watch on Netflix now, I highly recommend that one. Definitely, that's my recommendation. That one's definitely going to be on the ones for the best movies of 2024, easily. And in terms of TV, there's a show that I just did a review for on this channel here. My first thoughts on the first 2 episodes of this show. Feud, Capote versus the Swans. And basically the story of this is that you have Truman Capote, who destroys his friendships with the jet-setting socialites of New York City high society by writing a thinly fictionalized account of their scandalous and hedonistic personal lives in his unfinished novel, Answered Prayers. This causes them all to vow revenge and ruin his life. And their favorite meeting spot is the La Côte Basque, because you see that a lot in the first 2 episodes. You have Naomi Watts, Diane Lane, Chloe Sevigny, Callista Flockhart, Demi Moore, and Molly Ringwald as the 6 leading ladies in this. But you also have Treat Williams in one of his last performances. I think this is the last performance. And Tom Hollander is playing Truman Capote. I really like the first 2 episodes a lot. I think they're very well done. The 6 ladies are perfect in this. Naomi Watts, Diane Lane, Chloe Sevigny, Callista Flockhart, they're fantastic in the show. Demi Moore and Molly Ringwald haven't had a whole lot to do as of yet, because in the first episode, Demi Moore's character gets killed off at the end, but in the preview that shows up in the last episode, it seems like we're going to get more of her in flashbacks down the road, as well as Molly Ringwald, who plays Joanna Carson, who I didn't know if that was actually Johnny Carson's former ex-wife, who kind of divorced him and tried to take half of his stuff, and this is actually that person, and she is only in there for a little bit in the second episode. I've been really enjoying this, except for one critical aspect of the show, and I think it's one of the reasons why the show is called this. I'm not a big fan of Truman Capote in this. I really don't like the portrayal of Tom Hollander as Truman Capote. I mean, it's not a bad performance, but it's more of a performance that's just kind of like, it's been done to death. Like, I feel like guys like Philip Seymour Hoffman and Toby Jones have done this performance more than well enough to really make that character stand out on his own. But even like I said, he's not bad, but he's just given a generic Truman Capote performance. Like, he has to be flamboyant, he has to be the asshole, he has to be that guy that has to be a little cocky. And honestly, I hate saying this because this should never be funny, but when his lover John O'Shea beats the crap out of him in the second episode, I was laughing so hard. It's just like, you know what? He's such a... Unlike Bart Simpson in that episode of The Simpsons where they're talking about where they're watching the beauty pageant, and one of the guys is a fashion critic, and then he throws one of those zingers, and Bart's just laughing, going like, he's such a bitch. Like I was feeling that way watching Truman Capote, and it's just like, you know what? He's such a bitch. He deserves to get smacked like that. I will say though, that guy John O'Shea, played by Russell Tovey, is really good in this. Like, he can give a menacing performance that just stands out so well in this. Like, a lot of this I'm really liking. I just hope that Truman Capote gets more involved as a character as we go down the road here, because I feel like that character needs to be more involved and get more get better as the show goes on, because I feel like he's the weak link of this particular show right now. He's kind of like the Brock Purdy of this show. Like, he's the one thing that's keeping me from saying that this is a great show in general. Like, he's not bad, but he's just not living up to the caliber with the rest of the talent involved in here. I mean, it's a great show, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where it goes from there. So definitely check out the first 2 episodes, Feud Capote versus the Swans. I'll have a link to my review of that down in the description below as well if you want to check that out. But those are my recommendations for the week. So with that said, we're going to wrap this episode of the Reviewing Network Live up. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. And if you want to hear more of these, want to see more of these, hit the like and subscribe button. Check out some of the episodes we've done in the past. And I will see you guys for the next episode. So I'll see you guys next week. Next week will be our big Super Bowl live watch. Where I'm going to be watching. I got to figure out how to do that because I don't want to get copyright blocked on this because I'm going to be watching the game as I'm doing this. So I'll figure it out. But by that time we actually do that. But also this week I want to bring this up here because I'm going to try something. I'm going to try to bring some of my Time About the Movies episodes to this channel, but I'm going to take the clips out. The clips on from each movie, and I'm going to just do the reviews on there. In there, it'll be a condensed down version of those episodes. I'm going to see how that works out. I'll start off with 1 episode, and then continue. I'll start off with 1 episode a week, and then we'll see where it goes from there. We'll slowly but surely evolve it as it goes along if it becomes successful enough. So I'll do that. I'll see if that works out. I don't know when I'm going to post that up, but that's something that to be on the lookout for this week. So yeah, with all that said, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next week. So until then, we are out.